What's up, everybody? It's Tuesday, the 20th of September, and we're all here for a wonderful WRC meeting. What you reckon? Okay, if there is no more new business or old business, then I'm going to introduce Alex Andrade, and he's going to speak to us. He's going to have a nice spiel, so long or as short as he likes, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much. So I thought that this was going to be a candidate forum, so I thought my Democrat opponent might have been invited. If she wasn't, I was mistaken. But I brought a book with me. It's like a cheat sheet, essentially, of what we did during the 2022 legislative session. If you notice the map on this book, where it cuts off, I was about ready to go. The Speaker of the Florida House, he prints these books for us as like it was a nice little gesture of all the work we did. But when I saw this, I was about ready to go walk up to his office and have a talk with him until I realized that he'd taken the panhandle off, or at least the farthest west part of the panhandle off the front page of the book. So the panhandle, the farthest west part, including my district, got its own separate cover page on the back. But no, I appreciate y'all inviting me to come speak. This is an example of one of the many groups that I think are popping up more and more and getting more and more attendance right now of local community residents who are getting more and more engaged in what's going on around them as far as the government's and the government's interaction with them is concerned, right? So, during the primary election campaign, I used to like to joke, because Chris Kerb of Flood Defenders was at every candidate forum and every event. I used to like to joke that I was a flood defender before Chris Kerb. It was, one, a true statement, because his boss, the founder of Flood Defenders, I brought him down to Pensacola right after Hurricane Sally and gave him a tour of all the flooding infrastructure issues that we had, and introduced him to Grover Robinson at the city and Robert Bender at the county. And he said he was going to go fund programs to help with the flood infrastructure advocacy here, and resulted in Chris Kerb getting hired. But two, I appreciate what organizations like Flood Defenders are doing, what organizations like y'all are doing, because it keeps local, state, and federal government officials more honest. And the more educated you are, and the more savvy you are, and the more sophisticated you are, the more honest you can make us. So I figured if it's just me tonight, I can kind of cut through. And how many of y'all are veterans? All right. Are you guys comfortable with some light profanity? Like if I say things like I can cut through the BS with y'all, is that acceptable? Oh, yeah. If a single person says no, just quietly nod your head. I'm not going to out you or anything, but like if a single person says no, I won't. But sincerely, I appreciate groups like this, because you guys are here sincerely trying to learn how local government works, how state government works, to help make your communities better. And I appreciate that. Earlier you were talking about a zoning issue and height restrictions on flight paths. How many of y'all are familiar with a website called MuniCode? So more than most groups, but MuniCode, it's MUNICODE.com, I believe. MuniCode is the source of all the local laws in the nation. If you're a city and you pass what's called an ordinance, you're passing a law, and that law has to be recorded somewhere. There are two key fundamental American concepts that apply here. The first is due process, and the second is equal protection. They get abused a lot and trotted out by politicians a lot who kind of misconstrue it, but ultimately what due process is the function of our government making sure we all know the rules that we're playing by. So MuniCode is one of the ways that local governments make sure that we all know the rules that we're playing by. If you want to know what the county says on a specific zoning issue, you can start by going to MuniCode, selecting the state of Florida, selecting Escambia County, And then you can search within Muni Code to see every law that Escambia County has, every ordinance that Escambia County has on zoning restrictions for different properties. Then you can also go to the Escambia Property Appraiser's website to look up maybe what one specific property's zoned as. But you can go and use that website and that resource to arm yourselves with the information to tell your county commissioners and Commissioner Kohler, or soon-to-be Commissioner Kohler. I apologize if some of these people become a pain in your butt. But you can go arm yourselves and say, this sentence in Escambia County's Code of Ordinances needs to change to fix my problem. And this sentence is poorly drafted. And you can print it off as a Word document, and you can bring it to your county commission meeting, and you can you can take up your full 3 minutes in the public forum. And I'm not sure how much time they allocate on specific topics, agenda items at county commission meetings, but you can take up your full time there too. And you can go make change armed with the information that your commissioners need to know to actually make that change for you. Because I'm 33 now. Sometimes, yeah, I'm 33. I turned 33 in July, and since I turned 30, I kind of forgot my age sometimes. But I'm still naive enough to think that most folks who run for office are doing it for the right reasons, and they're doing it because they want to feel like they're doing right by the folks that put them in office. So if you're armed with the correct information, and you have a critical path, right? If you've identified a critical path and you know exactly what you need to make the change that you believe is right for your community, I'm naive enough to think that most folks who are elected officials are going to want to try and make that happen for you. Because I know the most frustrating part for me when I have a meeting with a constituent is when they come to me with a problem and they don't have the solution. I'm happy to work with them on the solution, but if they come to me with a problem and they say it's a problem, but they can't identify why it's a problem, then I don't know what to do to help you, right? But if you come to me with a problem and the solution, I don't care who you are. I don't care how much money you're worth. I don't care if you've ever donated to a campaign or ever voted. If you have a sincere problem and you convince me that it's an actual problem, I'll move heaven and earth to try and fix it for you. Because naively enough, that's what helps me sleep at night. The state legislature, how many of y'all know that you're in Senate District 1 for the Florida legislature? All right, how many of y'all know that you're in House District 2 for the Florida legislature? All right, so the vast majority of y'all, you're a much more sophisticated group than most. The state legislature has a very broad jurisdiction, but very limited power, if that makes sense. The U.S. Constitution has what's called the 10th Amendment. I'm sure everyone in here is familiar with the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment grants to the states everything that's not delegated to the federal government, right? So when we talk about delegated powers of the federal government, we're talking about exactly what's enumerated in the U.S. Constitution as far as their powers, because they are a delegated authority. Everything that's not specifically delegated to them is supposed to be left to the states and to the people. And what that means is when Congress decides to vote and say, we're going to require everybody, regardless of where they live in the United States, to buy health insurance, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to tell them, no, you're wrong. Unfortunately, another enumerated power of the federal government and Congress is the power to tax. So while, Nancy Pelosi was swearing up and down that the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare was not a tax, and it was perfectly within her rights to impose this requirement to buy insurance on the American people, the U.S. Supreme Court, reading the Constitution, the plain language of it, said, oh, no, Nancy Pelosi, she's not a lawyer. In fact, she'd be a terrible lawyer. She doesn't understand the Constitution. She doesn't have that power, but she does have the power to tax. So the folks that passed Obamacare lied their way to passage, swore up and down it wasn't a tax, swore up and down they had this power, and the Supreme Court said, no, you don't, but you do have the power to tax, and this is a tax. So young folks like me who are healthy enough not to necessarily have health insurance, we're still required to buy health insurance because Congress had that enumerated power to tax. When President Biden thought he was going to get legal advice from Nancy Pelosi and say, I'm going to use the power of the federal agency called OSHA to mandate every single person in the United States gets vaccinated, I knew immediately that he was full of you-know-what, right? Because the Supreme Court said, well, Congress, with their delegated authority to tax and spend, didn't have that power. So how would a president who's using a federal agency, and federal agencies have what's called delegated authority. Congress delegated some of their authority to OSHA to pass rules that otherwise Congress would have had to pass as a law. That's how OSHA exists. That's how every federal agency exists. Every federal agency exists because Congress says we're going to delegate some of our rulemaking authority, some of our law-passing authority to a federal agency. Congress created OSHA. They're allowed to make rules. Biden thought somehow that even though Congress didn't have the delegated authority, the enumerated authority to force me to buy health insurance, a federal agency could force me to get a vaccine. I stood up with Governor DeSantis. We passed the law. I sponsored the law saying the state will never force a single person to get a vaccine. And by the way, every single person in Florida who's not a federal contractor, member of the military, or dependent on Medicaid to get their paycheck, hospitals, CMS, you will never be forced in Florida to get vaccinated. And here are the list of different exemptions you can use. The Supreme Court agreed with us. And I'm not the best lawyer. My day job is as a lawyer. My job as a public servant part-time. I'm not the best lawyer, but that was real easy legal work. Because the Constitution, ultimately, at the end of the day, is pretty simple. The state jurisdiction has the police power under the 10th Amendment. Local governments have delegated police power. Everything that we haven't legislated or taken on, local governments can. Otherwise, you're free to do so under the 10th Amendment. So I have broad authority under that police power. Because technically, the federal government has limited authority. But I have limited power because I'm a part-time state rep. I'm term limited to 8 years in this job, 4 two-year terms. And I only serve in Tallahassee for about 4 months a year. My 2 constitutional requirements as a state representative is every year I have to pass a balanced budget. Florida's Constitution says we have to pass a budget every year. That's a constitutional requirement and it has to be balanced. 48 states have either a constitutional requirement or a legal requirement to pass a balanced budget. So I can brag about passing a balanced budget. And I do, because I'm proud of it. It takes work to pass a balanced budget. Even if I wasn't there and the most liberal of Democrats was in this seat, Florida would still have a balanced budget. However, the state of New York also legally has to have a balanced budget. Okay? The state of New York has fewer people than Florida. We surpassed them in population, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago. Anybody want to venture to guess how big the state of New York's balanced budget is compared to Florida's? So Florida's budget passed the $100 billion mark last year for the first time ever. It was a big deal. This past year, we passed, $112 billion budget. The state of New York, with fewer people, has a budget of over $200 billion. With fewer people. So those are things that we're proud of, right? We're proud of the fact that not only do we pass a balanced budget, our debt service ratio is very low. We're responsible with your money. And our tax burden on individual citizens is the lowest of any large state and one of the lowest tax burdens in the country for citizens in the United States. So even with your property taxes, which are higher than most other states because we have a sales tax dependent state, we don't have a state income tax and we never will, God willing. We have one of the lowest overall tax burdens in the country. And that's something I'm proud of. So other than me mansplaining to y'all for the past 15 minutes about what my role actually is, I'm happy to talk about anything you guys care about and answer any questions you guys have. Otherwise, I'll keep talking about my job. If there are no questions, I'll keep talking about my job.
Keep going.
All right, so I was elected in 2018 for my first term. Because the Florida House is term limited, and we're limited to those 4 two-year terms, we have a Speaker of the House, similar to Congress, right? But that Speaker of the House only serves for 2 years as the Speaker. So 2 out of your 8 years in the Florida House, you might be top dog, but that's it. To be top dog, you have to serve for the full four terms. The Speaker of the House is selected 6 years in advance. All right, so we're term limited. So when is a state house member the most powerful if we're term limited? We're term limited in our 4th term, right? So we're most powerful in that 4th term. When we've had the most experience, we've raised the most money, we have the most connections, okay? We're a Republican majority for the past 30 years. So we elect classes every year. And to make it easier, we call ourselves freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. When you're a freshman, because of the rules that we've imposed on ourselves, you're not allowed to talk about who's going to be your speaker in your 4th term during your first of 2 legislative sessions in that 1st term as a freshman. But the second the gavel hits the table at the end of your 1st session of your 1st term, the speaker's race is on. How many of y'all think we follow the rules? All right, and by the way, we only passed those rules like 4 years ago. 4 or 5 years ago. Before that, speakers were definitively chosen 9 years in advance. Okay? Because if you get elected midterm, right? So say I die or I leave office halfway through a term. Someone's got to replace me. Okay? The person that replaces me is going to be a Republican. And that person is going to have 1 extra legislative session. I get 8 total sessions because I was elected in a regular term. But if I'm what's called a red shirt freshman, I get 1 extra term. I get, not 1 extra term, 1 extra session. That means I get 1 extra year where I get to go be in Tallahassee, learn the process, make connections with other legislators, and raise more money. And with that money, I can turn around, and when the rest of my Republican class, the other 30 or so Republicans that are going to get elected for their 1st terms along with me, I can go help pick which Republicans are going to be in my class. That makes sense? All right, so I go raise that money for a year before these other folks might have even filed for office. Help the Republicans that I want to be in my class win their primaries and then their generals. They're going to go vote for me as the speaker. Okay? So, and there's nothing unethical or inappropriate about this. This is just a fact of life. These are business decisions. How many of y'all own businesses or are business people? You make business decisions every day?
Hope so.
Right. These are business decisions. There's nothing unethical about this. These are just facts of life, right? Like you got competitors that provide the same product. You want to go compete with them on price and value. Same thing here. I want to go compete with anyone else who wants to be the speaker in my class on what I'm bringing to the table for the other members of my class. So when I decided I was going to run for office the first time when I was 27, I'd worked in Tallahassee to pay for law school. So I'd worked at the Department of Transportation for the secretary for a year. This was back when Governor Rick Scott was still in office in the governor's mansion. When I moved here, I understood all of this stuff already. I understood how the legislature worked. I'd worked in an agency that had one of the biggest budgets in the state. At the time, it was big. It was considered big. DOT was at a $9 billion budget. At this point, we're about like $15 billion for DOT. I understood that component, and I also understood that folks in the Panhandle, we've not been the speaker, and we've not been on the right side of speakers' races in a really long time. Meaning the folks in jobs like mine either ran for speaker themselves and lost, or backed the wrong horse. So my whole point of running for office was to first say, I am absolutely, definitively, 100% not running for speaker. I'm going to go find the person I believe is going to be the speaker and back them. Like the person that I believe in the most, the person that I thought would be the best person for my class to be the speaker, the person that I trusted the most, and the person that had the best chance of winning. I backed them, and they became the speaker of my class. That was my first year, my biggest accomplishment. And I'd passed some good legislation my first year. I'd gotten some good stuff in the budget. That was my proudest achievement, because that meant when I'm in my 4th term, the top dog is somebody that I trusted and liked and somebody I was close with. Because like, Like with our ethics rules and with our term limits, there's no like smoke-filled back room anymore. That stuff doesn't exist. I buy lobbyist drinks all the time. It's never gone the other way. I've never gotten a free cocktail, never gotten a free dinner or lunch, not even a breakfast or a bottle of water. Ethics rules say I can't. I knew that we had folks who left this office after one term, and I was going to dedicate myself to this job. I was not going to run for speaker. I was going to put the community that I was trying to represent ahead of my own political ambitions, and I was going to show exactly what it took to do this job with the level of respect it required for the constituents that put you there, and the level of respect that it had for the job itself. Before I ran for this office, the last person to serve in this job for more than one term was Clay Ford, who died in office. And he died midterm, and that's how Mike Hill ultimately took his spot and was a redshirt freshman. So Mike Hill ran for speaker himself, and he was on the outside looking in during his kind of redshirt term. And then you had Frank White, who after one term ran for attorney general. How many chairs of committees are freshmen in the Florida House, you think? Zero. So the way it works, sincerely, in the Florida House, because we're term limited, is in your freshman term, you're not the chair, you're nothing. You're learning the ropes, you are at the bottom of the totem pole. As far as the rankings go, you've put the least work in, you understand the least amount of what's going on, you have zero seniority, you are a member. As a sophomore, you might get assigned a role if people trust you. That might mean a chairmanship. That might mean a different role in like the majority office to pass legislation. But odds are still not good, even as a sophomore, that you'll be a chair. It's not until your junior and senior term, your 5th to 8th term, that you get to make any actual decisions based on your role in the system. So if we've had almost a decade where no one has served more than 3 years, how much influence do you think the person in this job has had?
Very little.
Right. And that's because when we campaign, right? When I campaign, I don't talk about local issues because most voters don't care about it. I don't even talk about really state issues a lot of times because most voters don't care. I've knocked on thousands of doors. This past summer was my 3rd primary election in 5 years. I've knocked on some of y'all's doors 3 times in 5 years. I can tell you definitively, before this election, the only 2 questions I could guarantee would be asked in a day, and they would be asked a lot, is do you support Trump? And are you pro-life? And that was it. All right, so the electorate, if the electorate doesn't care or know or care to know about the day-to-day job of what it takes to be effective in this role, what I have to communicate are what's called litmus test issues or wedge issues, right? So I'm not offended that those are the only 2 questions that I could guarantee would be asked multiple times in a day. Like, voters would ask me those questions because based on my answers to those questions, they would know everything else they felt they needed to know about where my mindset was at, where my moral compass was at, to make all the other decisions they felt like they wanted me to make. Commissioner?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, I got some walking those too. So what's your priorities for District 2?
My priorities?
Yeah.
So after, if you follow the news at all, have you heard anything about Baker Acts?
Yep.
Okay. So all of my personal priorities, everything I thought would be good government that I'd focus on, has to take a back seat to the fact that we're about in 60 days now, 70 days now, to have almost 50% fewer beds to treat people who are being Baker Acted. And it's a much more serious issue than people realize. And it's a failure of the state. It's not a failure of a hospital. All right, so like West Florida Hospital announced that they were no longer going to be accepting Baker Act patients. They commit about 70 beds / patients per week to Baker Act patients. Baptist Hospital treats about 100, has about 100 bed commitments per week for Baker Act patients. So we're losing 70 out of 170 in about 60 or 70 days. By law, how many of you guys are concerned about EMS capacity and firefighters? I'm assuming the majority of y'all, if you're on like Escambia Citizens Watch or anything especially. By law, EMS, if they have a Baker Act patient, they have to take them to a hospital. And by law, if you're a sheriff with a Baker Act patient, you have to take them at least to what's called a receiving facility. So DCF runs our Baker Act program. If you're a facility, for the longest time, Lakeview is a receiving facility. They're not a hospital. EMS couldn't take them to Lakeview, but they could take them to Baptist or West Florida. Lakeview, after they separated from Baptist, they started changing their business model and exactly how they provided service to the community. They stopped being a receiving facility last year. West Florida now is saying the same thing, leaving only Baptist. Meaning our sheriffs, because they're by law required to take someone who's being Baker Acted to a receiving facility, have to go to the next closest receiving facility. The next closest after Baptist Hospital for Escambia, Santa Rosa, or Okaloosa sheriffs is Walton Beach, which is a small one. And once they're at capacity, the next closest is Panama City. So our sheriffs are, trying to do right by someone who's posing a threat to themselves or others, will now have to drive to Panama City before they can come back and do their day-to-day jobs. Our EMS is the same thing. So I don't care what else my issues were. Like, we've done a lot, and I can talk about flooding infrastructure funding, grant funding for other issues. Priority number 1 through 5 right now for me is figuring out what it's going to take to get more capacity for Baker Act and what's called Marchman Act, which is similar to Baker but for drug overdoses and drug abuse services back to this community. Yes, sir.
What are the numbers on the Baker Act? I mean, what are we looking at as to how many we have and how many we need to deal with our weekly or monthly, even an annual basis? So
it's about 170 a week that these two hospitals have had to take care of for Santa Rosa and Escambia County. About 170 a week. But, I mean, again, I mentioned it's not one hospital's problem, and I'm not vilifying West Florida for making the decision. It's the state's fault for being in the situation. We required sheriffs by law to drop them off at a receiving facility, but we did nothing to make sure that each county had a receiving facility. So we created the situation to where a sheriff would have to drive outside of their own jurisdiction to comply with the law, and we didn't even care about it until there was an impending crisis. Ms. Green?
So would the logical thing to do would be for you to write up legislation to require every county to have such a facility? Is that within your scope?
It is, but it's not necessarily the logical solution. The logical solution is one, and we've already gotten here, determining why Lakeview and West Florida said they're no longer going to be a receiving facility.
I would imagine it's meant.
Yeah. If you don't have insurance, if you're an uninsured patient, there's no mechanism to fund West Florida, to refund West Florida or Lakeview for the services they're providing. So we've done a disservice to our sheriffs and EMS by requiring it by law and without having this funding mechanism. If you remember a decade ago, there was a big fight about expanding Medicaid. Well, it's been a decade. The federal government hasn't stopped funding states at a 90-10 split for expanding Medicaid. So our current Medicaid program in Florida, and these are round numbers. Like you break it down by service code and everything, and it'll change. But round numbers, the state of Florida under the old Medicaid plan pays for 40% of the healthcare services a Medicaid patient receives, and the federal government pays 60%. And the whole reimbursement rate is hospitals will say it's underfunded, and the rate they're paying back is too low, but hospitals are still participating in Medicaid, right? So it's worth it at some level for them, even if it might be like kind of low. They can sometimes make up for it with volume. But like the state pays 40, the feds pay 60. If we expand the Medicaid population, everyone in the expanded Medicaid population, the state would pay 10% and the feds would pay 90.
That's now,
If we expanded.
if we expand.
The new population, right? So let's say like 45% of the states are Medicaid eligible potentially. We expand 20%. That 20%, the state would kick in 10, the feds would kick in 90. Yes, sir?
Isn't there one in Milton called Wolfka,
What's that?
behavioral clinic?
Potentially, but they're not a receiving facility. They don't take Baker Act. Like they won't receive Baker Act patients.
Okay.
They might take a Baker Act.
To go there.
Yeah, they might take a Baker Act patient if that patient has insurance and a hospital that has this person dropped off to them needs that service and they have insurance. But they get to kind of dictate who they take. And I'm not advocating for like widespread Medicaid expansion, but we have done incremental expansions, right? So for pregnant mothers, last year we did an expansion. So we expanded the population to provide services for prenatal care for pregnant mothers. 3 years ago, I passed a law to say the state school systems could bill Medicaid for services schools are providing to children who are Medicaid eligible. So like my bill that I passed saves the state about $50 million every year. Because the school districts were providing nursing care, mental health care, like counseling and everything, and transportation for medical appointments to children who were Medicaid eligible. The school system was not allowed to bill Medicaid until I changed the law. So why should the state school system be subsidizing Medicaid, right? So like we changed that law 3 years ago. We expanded health services for pregnant mothers last year. There's possibilities there, but it's not going to be a simple fix because it's going to require some funding. Yes, sir?
Do the other counties, I know the three you mentioned, do the other counties in the state, how do they handle the do they all have the same problems?
Yeah. And this isn't the only, so West Florida Hospital, and I want to clarify again, this is not one hospital's fault, right? So you hear the definition of like safety net hospital or for-profit or not-for-profit hospital. A lot of those definitions are misleading, right? There's no charity hospital in the state. Like no hospital's doing this stuff for free out of the kindness of their heart, right? Their mission can be a kind one that supports the service of the state and that makes them eligible for some tax incentives and some tax support, right? So if you're a nonprofit hospital, you don't have shareholders, your mission, your corporate culture is not to make money for shareholders, but that doesn't make you a charity. You still have to pay every single person that works there. So West Florida Hospital is owned by HCA. It's one of the largest healthcare companies in the country. HCA is a for-profit hospital. They get unfairly vilified because their moniker is for-profit, right? West Florida, though, is not the only HCA hospital to pull out of being a receiving facility in the state of Florida. I think they're like the third or fourth now. So what that tells me, again, to Ms. Green's point, is that you have hospitals saying, this is a cost loser for our hospital, and this is an easy way for us to help make ends meet and help meet our budget. I mean, Sacred Heart is owned by Ascension. News came out today, Ascension is technically a nonprofit system. They're technically what's called a safety net hospital. Safety net hospital definition, by the way, is completely made up. Like Baptist isn't a safety net, they're also a nonprofit. But Ascension lost $1.5 billion on their books this past year. Like the news came out today about that, right? So they provide Medicaid patient services, they provide uninsured care to people, and they bill at the same rates that they say they bill everybody. And then Medicaid reimburses at a lower amount than the amount that they bill, kind of like the retail rate versus the reimbursement rate. And they have registered $1.5 billion in the books. That doesn't mean Ascension's going bankrupt tomorrow. It means what they say their retail rate was versus their reimbursement rate were different by $1.5 billion. If we started paying every hospital what they say their retail rate is, the country would go bankrupt. Right? So but there's an in-between. This is a system that the government created. It's the government's fault that we're in the system. And by the way, Obamacare did not solve a single problem in providing value health care. Every time someone in the government says, we're going to solve the problem by paying more for it, they're solving nothing. Right? All Obamacare did was say, healthcare is too expensive, we're going to start paying more for it. Does that drive down costs for anybody? Does that increase value for the patient? There's like 3 pillars, right? Like you got the triangle of like what actually provides value to the community. And if your public servant's not focused on the 3 pillars, they're missing something economically, right? But the ways to provide value to your constituents are transparency in pricing, competition, and innovation. Right? So when I'm like regulating a market that the state's already regulating, I'm like trying to tweak it, I have to answer those 3 questions. Does this increase transparency, so we all know what the price actually is? Does this increase competition? And does this incentivize innovation? If it doesn't do at least one of those 3 things, it's not fixing a single problem. Obamacare solved none of those 3, right? It didn't increase transparency. It definitely didn't increase competition, and it definitely didn't incentivize innovation. It just said, hey, the government's going to be the one writing the check. That's it. If y'all disagree with me, let me know, but yes, ma'am?
Well, the only thing I'm saying on that is there's a no idea, but the problem with that being in the healthcare industry, they didn't, in this forecast, they don't have the manpower. I was at a conference last week, and that's another reason why West Florida got out. Mental health doesn't pay, but the fact is when you're lacking so many nurses and healthcare providers, you have to move your resources to what you can get money on.
Yeah.
And so I like that you're going after the Baker Act, but it's going to be bigger than that because it's a staffing issue across the country. For example, I was in Bozeman, Montana last year. The week before that, they had a strike in Montana. They were paying nurses $8,000 a week. Bozeman's giving them houses and paying them $4,000 a week. I get 3 to 4 options a day that can make a lot more than a county commissioner. But I will tell you this, the problem is actual staffing, which is affecting the product line and the return on investment to deal with these problems. That's just a fact.
Yeah, you're not getting into disagreement with me. Like every single hospital's nursing budget has quintupled in the past 2 years. I mean, travel nurses make a lot more money. And hospitals have the bright idea right now, a lot of them are saying we need non-competes for nurses so that you can't go from Baptist as a travel nurse and then go to Sacred and then go to West Florida and then go back to Baptist. So travel nurses make a lot more money right now than nurses who have been at these hospitals for a very long time because the staffing shortage in things like nursing and teaching nationally are so high. Did y'all know that the state of Texas is going to Auburn in their teaching program and offering them $10,000 bonuses for teaching grads from Auburn to move to Texas? Anytime someone talks about the teacher shortage and the teacher crisis in Florida, and they neglect to bring up the fact that the teaching shortage isn't just a U.S. problem, it's a worldwide problem, they're lying to you. The state of Florida, we passed 2 years ago a $500 million teacher raise bill. So if you're a teacher, I don't care what county you're in, I don't care what union you're a member of, we voted to fund $500 million to give you a raise that your union didn't even negotiate for. The next year, we did the same thing, another $500 million. This year, we made it $800 million, and we said $400 million goes to veteran teachers to give them raises, and $400 million goes to starting teacher pay to continue trying to drive up the starting teacher salary in Florida to incentivize more people to come into the market. We've been working on the teacher shortage for 3 years now, at least on the funding side. This is an issue nationally. The same with the nursing shortage. But again, it's tough sometimes when you get caught up in national narratives and you're trying to explain things on a local level. You know, like I was happy to see Governor DeSantis fly 50 whole migrants to Martha's Vineyard last week. Right?
Weren't we all?
I loved it because I've been living it, right? So we've had 70 flights from the federal government not coordinating with the state at all. The Biden administration has flown 70 flights of illegal immigrants to the state of Florida without coordinating with the state over the past year. Busing as well. Like, the federal government is bringing people into our state. The Department of Homeland Security jokingly calls their own program the Abbott Plan because Governor Abbott in Texas has started doing it, and DHS started jokingly calling their own program to move illegal immigrants from the border in Texas inland. They called it the Abbott Plan, and all it took from little old Florida was 2 flights of 50 total folks to make it a national discussion. It's like the greatest awareness campaign I've ever heard of. And it's been fun for the past week to talk about it because, like, I'm an immigrant. I know when you saw me, you were like, that guy's half Jamaican. I'm half Jamaican. I was born in the Bahamas. I was born in the Caribbean, the Cayman Islands. My whole family is made up of immigrants. The national discourse about, you know, if you oppose illegal immigration, you're xenophobic, you're hateful, it's silly, it's stupid. But at the same time, we have a crisis at our southern border. We have Governor Ducey in Arizona, Governor Abbott in Texas saying, listen, we have millions of people crossing the border. We had 50 people die in a trailer truck in June in Texas, and the federal government saying our borders are secure. And we got these northern cities saying we're a sanctuary city. It was the most ridiculous virtue signaling national debate ever. And all it took was 2 flights to help bring the issue to the national coverage. Yes, sir?
So let me change the topic just a little bit here. And I think these are 2 perhaps related questions. So last year, you were one of the supporters of the residential solar net metering changes to it, okay? So what are your thoughts on that now? And what are your thoughts on the potential rate increases out of the PSC for Florida Power in this area going forward?
All right, so what I've learned for the past year is that WEAR, when I give them a 12-minute interview, they're going to cut it to 30 seconds, and all the information is going to be lost in translation, and then Facebook's not my friend on the topic. But so it's 2 very different issues, right? So first, FP&L bought the most inefficient power company in the state in Gulf Power 4 years ago. Gulf Power, this is a historical record, public record of the Public Service Commission. Gulf Power has always had the highest electric rates in the state of Florida, higher than every municipality, every co-op in the state. FP&L, by comparison, in their traditional territory in southeastern central Florida, has beaten every municipality and co-op in the state. And this is not me defending them, it's just a fact, right? I'm not an apologist for FP&L. It's just a fact that their rates have been lower than every co-op and municipality in the state for a decade. They bought the most inefficient power company in Gulf Power, who was really good at PR, but not the best at providing power efficiently, okay? So they bought Gulf Power 3 years ago. They've run Gulf Power for 3 years. FP&L has. It's just been FP&L under a different name. And we had our first rate increase in 4 years in January, the highest usage month of the year. And that also happened to be the first month that FP&L changed the name on your bills. So we've had some serious issues with communication and public information. We've had some serious difficulty explaining what an inverted rate structure is, right? So we're the last region of the state to incorporate an inverted rate structure, meaning after your first 1,000 kilowatts, you're charged more per kilowatt. I'm not an advocate for or against the inverted rate structure. I just know that was the first time Northwest Florida has experienced it, and a lot of folks were not prepared for it. The biggest sin, the most identifiable sin that FPL committed was not preparing folks for that inverted rate structure. Because if it was the same rate for the first 1,000 as all the kilowatts afterwards, most folks wouldn't have had the sticker shock with their first bill with FPL's name on it. They had a couple issues with rate calculations and kilowatt usage calculations. Every single person who's come to my office with a kilowatt question saying, my kilowatt usage is incorrect, I've told them the same thing. File a complaint with the Public Service Commission because they can investigate what they don't know about, right? Like the police, you get robbed on a sidewalk. Until you file a report with the police, they're not investigating it. You can't complain about the police until you tell them you got robbed, right? File a complaint with the Public Service Commission and then send me your kilowatt usage. Also, send FP&L your kilowatt usage. They should be working on it without my involvement. If they haven't helped you with your legitimate kilowatt usage recording issue, I will step in. And we've helped get some folks corrected on their kilowatt usage because they had legitimate kilowatt issues with their recording, right? The rate is different than your natural gas rate. So Pensacola Energy changes their rates, and they can change their rates because they're not subject to the Public Service Commission every month. So if the price of natural gas increases and the cost to Pensacola Energy to buy wholesale gas increase that month, they can change the rate per unit of their natural gas on your next bill. You don't notice it because it changes every month. And it's not like astronomical fluctuations or anything like that, but you don't notice that the rate specifically changes every single month. And it doesn't necessarily have to change, but it can. You won't notice because it changes per month. When you have one rate increase built up after 4 years without a rate increase, you're going to feel it, right? Does that make sense?
Can I ask you a question on that?
Wait 1 second. So the rate increase being discussed now is a clickbait rate increase. And what I mean by that is multiple times a year, like 2 to 3 times per year, every utility company in the state that uses natural gas to power their electric generation units, right, their power plants, goes to the Public Service Commission, proves up how much natural gas costs, and gets a rate adjustment. If the price of natural gas goes down, the cost passed on to consumers gets reduced based on the cost of natural gas. So what we've seen in the news is that TECO out of Tampa, Duke out of several portions of the state, and FP&L have all gone to the Public Service Commission for their second time this year to say natural gas has increased and we need to increase how much we pass on of those costs to consumers. This is not the rate increase that you're thinking about because the rate increase that has always been discussed in the news locally is the cost of power delivery, insurance, employing people, storm recovery, undergrounding, infrastructure, everything to deliver power to you. That is the rate, and that rate has to go down next year. Nobody controls the natural gas. That is why, the price of natural gas as far as an electric company is concerned. That's why the 10% approximately, and that's a rough number, that every power company makes in profit, like guaranteed by statute, is not dependent at all on the price of natural gas or that component of your bill. So FP&L might increase the natural gas pass-through, the energy generation pass-through on your bill. They make zero more profit on that increase. Like that component of your bill has no relation to what FP&L makes in profit, passing on to shareholders or passing back to charities, whatever. The rate increase being discussed in the news right now is just the natural gas increase that every power company always goes back to the Public Service Commission to get adjusted. The overall rate on power delivery still has to go down next year, set by that rate case that was finalized last year and is currently on appeal to the Supreme Court. And I need to preface this before anybody speaks. I want to remind everybody that I've already told you you need to file a complaint with the Public Service Commission if you think something's wrong. If I'm an advocate for, a spokesperson for, or a defender of a power company, do you think I'd be telling you to file complaints to the agency that regulates them? I hope the answer is no. Because I just want your quality of life to improve, going back to the 3 pillars I talked about earlier. Net metering, the solar stuff, well, I co-sponsored that and supported it because it was the only bill as a legislator that would have resulted in lowering rates for anybody. So I just talked about natural gas and that cost. The way net metering is set up is if I have solar panels and I don't use that energy during the day, by law, the power company has to buy it from me. They don't buy it from me at the natural gas rate, they buy it from me at the retail rate. Meaning the franchise fees that go to the city and the county, the taxes that go to the city and the county, have to get paid by the power company. Power company is a monopoly. They pass all their costs of doing business back onto the consumer. That make sense? Right, so, all right. So if by law right now I'm requiring FP&L to pay 4 times as much for a kilowatt that's generated on a roof versus what they could pay in the open market, that's an arbitrarily inflated rate that gets passed on to all other consumers that own solar panels. This isn't my idea, this is California's idea. California by law required like new construction to have solar panels on their roofs, and they're at 10% market penetration.
Am I supposed to be here? I'm sorry. I don't know how to come in quietly.
Just one second. So California's got 10% market penetration. California says folks that can't afford solar, folks that live in apartments, are paying $200 more per year because they can't own solar panels and because they have the same system that we currently do. They were proposing saying, instead of paying new solar panel owners the retail rate per kilowatt, we'd pay them the avoided cost rate, which is more than the wholesale cost of that natural gas, but less than the retail rate. So instead of like 4 times the value of that kilowatt they'd be getting paid like 1.2 times the value of that kilowatt.
However, it would seem that there was an argument that, okay, if you just look at the fuel rate, okay, as opposed to the residential solar generation, also the person that's generating power and putting it back on the grid, excess power back on the grid for the solar, or residential solar rate, they invested in their meter, they invested in the infrastructure, they invested in the rooftop installation of that physical plant. All of those costs are avoided by the power company, and they're getting essentially energy on an already available connection to the grid.
Yeah.
And you also are promoting this industry in the state to be able to generate more jobs, to be able to have some incentives to make these solar panels more efficient. You know, and let's say we can't store energy, so we're never going to get away from, you know, chemical storage, natural gas, whatever, nuclear coal. You're just not going to get away from that period. It seems like it's a very reasonable thing to pay for the energy that's being produced as a pass-through to the power company. Then from what they would be paying if they had to mine the gas, transport the gas, build this plant to burn the gas, burn the gas, then transport that through the power line.
No, that's what I was saying though. So the retail rate has taxes, franchise fees, delivery fees, all built into it too. On the open market right now, Gulf FP&L can get a kilowatt for 10 cents. The net metering rate that they're required by law to pay solar owners is like 40 cents because it's the retail rate. So you pay 40 cents per kilowatt at the retail rate if you don't own solar panels. FP&L had to pay the full retail rate. There's a value. That's why I referenced the full avoided cost, right? So the full avoided cost is more than the one that it costs to obtain that kilowatt in the open market. Because if Gulf Power, FP&L, doesn't own a power plant, they have to go buy it on the open market, and they can get that kilowatt on the open market for 10 cents. The only people that are getting paid 40 cents for that kilowatt are solar panel owners.
Well, they pay 10 cents for it once they have already incurred the sunk cost for their physical plant and transport.
No, I'm saying on the open market. I'm saying they don't generate it. They buy it from Oklahoma wind farms that they don't own. That happens right now. Like FP&L doesn't provide all the power. They don't generate themselves all the power that we actually consume. They buy it on the open market, anything they don't generate themselves. That makes sense?
Okay, I can see.
That is the case. Like I've had to live it. I've got people vilifying me all the time, being like, "You hate solar." No, I just hate subsidies. I thought conservatives hate subsidies. Like this like the current system at 4 times the actual value of that kilowatt is a subsidy. And all I was doing was saying in the future, because if you own solar panels right now, I said grandfather you in for 20 years. You get the subsidy for 20 years, longer than your solar panels will survive. But if you buy solar panels next year, you get 75% of that subsidy, and in a decade, we'd eliminate the subsidy, and you get paid 1.2%, like 1.2 times the value of that kilowatt, the full avoided cost. Because of everything you talked about, like you have suddenly this mini power plant in the middle of the grid. That's the 1.2 valuation for the kilowatt. All this bill did was eliminate a subsidy.
I'm having a hard time with that, but okay.
I can talk for hours on it afterwards if you want. Because, Governor DeSantis vetoed that bill because Duke Energy, which does not cover our territory, was the only one close to 5% market penetration. And Duke Energy said, if our territory gets to 5%, we're allowed to go back to the Public Service Commission to increase our rates. Like, the veto had nothing to do with Northwest Florida. Like, you can read the letter. But yeah, I mean, again, not a defender of it. But don't hate solar. We're the Sunshine State. Do hate subsidies in any form. Yes, sir.
Just a little different subject. On FP&L, I grew up with that, but I also did the last 37 years Gulf Power. Gulf Power always gave us excellent service. We have a lot of properties, street lights, parking lights and stuff. We have to call FP&L here now 3 and 4 times. And then whenever they come, they're all out-of-state trucks. So obviously they must be subbing everything out. I just don't think they came prepared to, I see them cutting down a lot of palm trees and stuff. They want to start burying wires for hurricanes and stuff like that. You're right, Southeast Florida, they're great. Here, I think they're absolutely terrible.
They have been. I mean, like I said, they took over the most. So Gulf Power was great at PR, great at customer service.
And they had a lot of local here, Gulf Power did.
They had twice as many employees. Gulf Power, though, at the time that they were great at the PR and the customer service, were charging us $130 some odd per 1,000 kilowatts, and FP&L was charging South Florida $90 per 1,000 kilowatts. So there's that like balance that comes into play. FP&L's invested $1.5 billion in improving our efficiencies here in Northwest Florida, and people are vilifying them for making $1 billion more in revenue. Where'd the other 0.5 come from? It came from South Florida. Like again, I'm not a defender of FP&L. I could have the debate. We could have a full-throated, long drawn-out, weeks-long debate about monopolies versus more competition, a more open market in the state of Florida. I'm perfectly fine with that. But what we have right now is a company that took over a very inefficient company at providing power efficiently. And they're terrible at PR. They laid off half of Gulf Power's employees. And they front-ended their bad PR and bad customer service. And we have to wait another year or two before rates come down. But those rates are set by law. Like those rates are a court order. That's why any politician who talks about lowering rates is saying, I'm going to go and involve myself in the judiciary. Do you like the separation of powers? Do you like having an independent judiciary, a legislature, and an executive? Do you want your partisanly elected politicians involving themselves in jury verdicts? I got lambasted, heavily lambasted for saying, I will never involve myself in a jury verdict. A rate case is called a rate case because it's an actual case. It's a lawsuit. Like another office, not the PSC, sued FP&L. The Public Service Commission is a judicial panel. They issued a verdict. I will never go invade the judiciary like that. I'll lament the fact that the judiciary is feeling more and more partisan in some areas. But it's like, I care about the separation of powers. I care about our federalist system. I care about our limited federal government and our 50 little laboratories of democracy. I'm never going to make folks happy and to avoid a couple angry Facebook commenters say anything different. If I lose an election, for saying I'm not going to break down our separation of powers and what makes the United States so special, I'll lose an election, go make more money and spend more time with my wife and my daughter who's going to get born in February. Like that's an easy analysis for me on the cost, on the cost, benefit side. At the same time, it was the frustrating part for FP&L was the fact that it's a complex topic that was constantly getting reduced down to sound bites. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question that's going to be off of what everybody's talking about, and you can answer it very quick. I just want to know what your opinion is on the red flag law.
I think the red flag laws, law enforcement love them because they're a great tool for them to kind of fast track some due process stuff. But when I say the two pillars of our American system are due process and equal protection, I think due process needs to be more heavily examined in that context, right? So we already had restraining order processes in Florida, injunction processes in Florida. They involved a little bit more due process in that context, right? So from my context, the red flag laws that Florida has are not nearly as egregious as the red flag laws that DC was trying to propose a few months back. But there still needs to be some more due process injected in there, and it needs to be heavily examined in the future. All right.
Thank you, sir. Alex Andrade, everybody. Do any of you have any questions for Mr. Alex Andrade? And if you would consider holding them until at the very end, and you can ask both candidates at the same time the same questions. What do you think? Great. So please put your hands together for Ms. Carollyn Taylor. Ms. Carollyn Taylor is running for the House Representative, District 2. Come right up. Carollyn Taylor.
You are so warm and friendly, thank you. My name is Carollyn Taylor. I am running for Florida State House District 2. I am the only Democrat in the race, so I didn't have a primary election. But I'm from Pensacola. My dad actually works out in NAS Pensacola. He retired from the Navy after 20 years and honorably served his country, still works at NAS. My wife is a retired naval flight officer. She graduated from the Naval Academy. We own a home. We don't have kids, so my golden retriever would have to live without me if I were to attain this office, and then I've got 2 cats. But I'm running for office because, and I graduated from Tate High School as well. I have a background in insurance. I also worked in politics starting in 2018, running the campaign for Dr. Z, who ran against Matt Gaetz in 2018. Worked for Senator Elizabeth Warren when she ran for president. I was her only staff member in the entire Panhandle, so organized that, and went to Georgia to ensure that free and fair elections were possible, and cure canvass to make sure that ballots were cured for that historic win. So I'm very passionate about making a change. I work in the cannabis industry currently, so I work at Certera Wellness in Pensacola. So I have my medical marijuana card. I also advocate for it. I know there's a lot of laws. I don't know if any of you guys are card holders that are preventing people from getting their medication right now. And so definitely making sure that people are able to keep their flower limits the way that they are, and then they're not limited from life-saving medications, which they just put caps on the rest of it, edibles, concentrates, all that other stuff. So we're paying our money. We don't want people to turn to the black market. I actually was thinking the other day how has drug arrests gone down since the legalization of medical marijuana, and we certainly don't want that to go back up. We want it to remain legal. And I'm passionate about infrastructure, expanding infrastructure. I know coming to the commissary is a chore for me because there's a lot of backed up traffic over on Barrancas and Navy. So we've actually been shopping at Winn-Dixie a lot lately just to save the hassle. We also go to the Navy Hospital, so I definitely know that trek from the city of Pensacola can take some time. There's no way to make it in less than 30. And if you guys are military, they only give you a 10-minute grace period, so you better be there on time. So expanding infrastructure, making sure that we have a strong education system. I am a product of public education. I went to AK Suter, graduated from Tate. And so I think that making sure that education and quality education is available to every family is something that is very important to me. Like I said, I don't have children. I don't know. Luckily, I'm in a school district that I would trust my kids to go to, a public school, if I were to have any. But I know it's a scary time in the world today, and we certainly want to make sure our education and the quality of it is not going down on top of worrying about mass shootings and things of that nature. I am a gun sense candidate. I'm endorsed by Moms Demand Action. We are gun owners. I believe in the Second Amendment. I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. But I think that when children are being killed at an alarming rate, I think the American Board of Pediatrics says it's like number 1 or 2, the cause. And, you know, I think that that's ridiculous. We got to look at something. Children are assets. They are people that we should be protecting, and we shouldn't be worried about that among all the other terrible things that are going on in the world. So making sure education is strong, making sure that we're not having culture wars in the classroom. I'm proud to say that I feel like I'm the only candidate that went through K through 12 here in Escambia County, and never heard of critical race theory. I'm not a fancy lawyer, but you know, I definitely have not learned that. I know when we went to my wife's Naval Academy reunion, they even said that's not something that was taught there. It won't be taught there under that superintendent's administration, and that it was on the books maybe in the early 2000s from an advanced legal course study. So that's something I'm not concerned about, but I definitely understand that there are things in the classroom, concerns that parents have in the classroom, but I'm just here to refute. Critical race theory is not one of those concerns of mine, and that's not a culture war that I'm gonna throw out there on the backs of our kids. So other than that, education, healthcare, making sure that our healthcare system is strong. Obviously, COVID-19 has revealed a lot of flaws and hurt a lot of families of all different income brackets, from low income to high income, and we need to make sure that our healthcare system is supporting that. My mom's a retired nurse. I don't support people, not having health insurance and then taxpayers going ahead and paying for all the injuries and stuff when they go to the ER and it's written off. So why don't we make sure that our healthcare system is equitable for everyone? I'm pretty sure that, if I were elected to the Florida State House, there are ways to actually save taxpayers money. We need an affordable Florida. I know right now here in Pensacola, being from here, owning a house, our neighbors' houses are selling for $500,000. It's crazy to us, but good for homeowners. But we need to make sure that affordable housing is a thing. Affordable power, making sure that, we have, if solar is something, if that's the way of the future, the way we're going, we do it right, not monopolize it and charge us for the mistakes that they're making, FPNL specifically, because obviously they're going to be losing billions of dollars when D-Day comes and they have to stop drilling. So I'm not a fan of paying for people's mistakes. I know the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta knows, your insurance companies know. I don't care if you believe in climate change, but clearly something's going on where we need to start preparing and enhancing and hardening our structure so places like Miami aren't underwater. But definitely, having choice in our power and making sure that we're being sustainable and not saying subsidies, but I do know that my parents, they are getting solar panels. I'm shocked. They're Republicans that live in Representative Salzman's district, and they're going to be paying like $200. And I tease my dad, oh, wasn't that great? He's like, yeah, we're getting all these things. And he's like, don't talk about the government helping me. We disagree on things. But yeah, I do think it's great when people can afford to make a change when they can't afford not to. So, they've gotten the new windows, they've gotten a new roof. There's nothing else that can be done to harden their infrastructure against these egregious power rates. I know my own power rate has gone up in the city of Pensacola. And I know that in the Facebook group where there's thousands of people in there and there's a contract of over 15,000 signatures or a petition on this stuff. These people are saying something's wrong. When vacant properties are being charged $800 for power bills, I don't know what that is. And I'd like to know how geographically they're targeting these people. I know Northwest Florida is a hot spot to be, so would hate for them to be driving locals and families and constituents out for the rich and the wealthy to come and take over who can afford those. But yeah, I'm a bit sassy, but I am definitely a fighter. And I have nothing to lose here. To be honest, it's hard running for office. It's hard to put yourself out there when you know that, as a voter and as someone someone who's been out there talking to hundreds of people about their power bills. If you want to vote for the Yahoo that co-sponsored the bill, I'm just like, hey, I mean, there's always brighter pastures ahead for me. But yeah, I'm open to any questions, and thank you for your time. And thank you for waiting for me. I do appreciate the 90 minutes that you took to hold the floor down. Yes, sir.
Let me come up to the microphone. I just want to ask you, are you familiar with the flood defenders?
Yes, Chris. How's it going?
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
Chris is here. What I want to know is one of the major problems we have are the infrastructure, especially along state highways with the drainage. What kind of a plan do you have that you see that we can incorporate the drainage with the construction that we need before the building actually takes place along the state routes? Because what you're looking at is a state office. And what can we do to ensure that sidewalks are in every one of the state roads for the children that don't take buses because they're within too small of a corridor? Secondly, speaking of the children, did I understand you to say that you don't recognize what wokeism is, or what's going CRT in
critical
schools?
race theory.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't see any
What
of that?
I was saying is that I've gone to school K through 12 here, and I've never learned critical race theory here in our own public system. And I know when I was at a Gulf Breeze Forum a few months ago before the primary, there were 2 school board members that also said that critical race theory is not in the schools, and that if there is a thorough investigation process that can and will happen. So it's very important. What was your name again?
I'm Keith.
Keith, it's very important, Keith, that if you see or hear of critical race theory being taught, that you follow those instructions to make sure that it's reported.
So
that they can address it.
how would you address that from a state point of view with the critical race theory? Because we already have a couple of situations going on now where our school board has been blindsided with a video that was shown to the teachers and with a questionnaire that was given to the children, which definitely had signs of critical race theory in there. So I'll give you the floor back, but I'm just curious as to how you would approach that.
Yeah, in terms of, you have multiple questions here. In terms of critical race theory from a state perspective, I don't feel that at the moment there's something to address. Like I said, there are concerns that I'm sure that parents have, but like I said, being someone who did K through 12 education here in Escambia and talking to current school board members, Carol Boston, she's very knowledgeable, and there was the other one, Linda Sanborn, she also said that as well. There is a process to report critical race theory. I support that. If your children or people you know are being taught that, please report it. It's just like I get people saying, oh, I have family that's misusing food stamps and stuff. I don't come from a family like that did that, but I know that there is a process to report that as well. And I always encourage report. I mean, report. Call me, But yes, that's all I can say, Keith, is report it. If you hear it, please talk to your school board members, but I don't feel like there's a concern right now. As far as flooding, having a background in insurance, working in insurance for 4 years before getting into politics, definitely that is an issue here. I don't care if you're in a flood zone or not, always get flood insurance, because if you don't have it, you're gonna wish you did if, we have historic flooding like happened in Texas and what's happening all over the country. As far as policy and building the infrastructure to support sidewalks and drainage and less flooding, I know that I'm going to do everything I can to do that. I'm going to have to do more research on how that would work. Obviously, any funding that's available to make that happen, I'm going to fight for that. I know that President Biden, he has allocated a lot of funds for infrastructure to all the states. I mean, billions, millions of dollars. So it's out there for all of us. I'm not going to cry about who it comes from. We just need to bring it home and make sure that we're enhancing all the systems accordingly. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I guess I'm supposed to go up here.
Yeah, you can. Or I can come closer.
What, that's his rule.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'll follow the rules.
All right, my name is Rhonda. And I'm wondering, do you also have a process where if children are being hypersexualized, K through 3, our governor is wanting to stop that? is there also a process to report like teachers and school districts?
What is hypersexual, like what, I'm sorry, I've never been hypersexualized in Escambia County School District.
Well, things are different nowadays since I was growing up in the school district. And
I graduated in 2011, I just turned 30, so not too terribly.
it is, it's a lot different, I think you know that. Well, people call it the Don't Say Gay law. You've heard of that, right?
I have, but I don't like calling it that because that's not what it was called. It was the parental rights and legislation. I think that was a very piece of it that was publicized. Not hypersexualized, but hyper-publicized in the wrong way. But yeah, if you'd let me know what is a teacher trying to, I don't want to make assumptions because that's such a very sensitive topic.
Well, yeah, exactly.
So that's why I'm asking, what is hypersexualization of a child?
The child comes in and the teacher starts talking about their personal life, or they want to say, it's okay, Johnny, you can be this or that. There's such thing as a blah, blah, and a blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? They don't need to be taught. I just don't want to say things like...
I don't either want to say things like, that's why I'm asking you to clarify.
Oh, you want me to say it?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If that's, I can't answer the question if you don't know, if I don't know what it is.
You have but you could still be a girl, you know what I'm saying? That kind of thing, that's could go on. And I'm just wondering, is there a way to report that?
I think the proper term for that might be transgender. Is that what you're talking about?
Not necessarily. I mean, that's just
when you're talking about, again, sensitive. I don't like talking about children genitalia at all.
Exactly.
Yeah. In fact, I think you're the only one that's talked about hypersexualization about kids on the campaign trail to me.
Well, good, because I think it's a very important thing for people that I know in Northwest Florida.
Absolutely.
And we have grandchildren that are young in that K through 3, third grade age group.
But yes, I'm sure there's a way to report that. Absolutely. I know that they've done a lot of things to strip children of protections to go to their guidance counselors and confide. I know now I think they have to call the parents.
Do you agree with that?
I think that, if I were a child and I trusted my guidance counselor, I would like to go to my guidance counselor and disclose if I was being abused at home or...
Well, sure, but I'm talking about this, like if the child wants to say that I'm transgender or I'm this or I'm feeling a certain way, but don't tell my mom and dad. Do you believe in that? Just say K through 3. Do you believe that's right?
I think that definitely the parent should be told, but I think at that point there should also be social services and other things that come in to make sure that that child's not retaliated against or abused because of any other beliefs, religion. I believe in separation of church and state. I believe in, people to be protected. And I know there are kids that grew up in Christian households that ended up atheist. I know that there are people who grew up in atheist households that grew up, ended up Christian. And I just think that in that process, it's a very delicate process, and I want to make sure that there are professionals in the room to advocate for the child as well. So yes, tell the parent, but make sure that, if he comes back to school and says, oh, I got beat because I was told,
absolutely.
There needs to be some, yeah, for sure. And education, absolutely. Like I said, there's very little knowledge that I have of people I know personally or families here in Escambia and Santa Rosa who have had kids undergo any sort of transgender surgery. So, I really, like I said, you're the only one who's talked about that. I don't think that if, I know some of the legislation is hairy that comes through, I don't think it's appropriate if you suspect a child is transgender that you should be allowed to check their private parts, which I know those are things that, yeah. So, like I said, very sensitive topic.
It is. And I agree, kids that are older, that's a little different. K through 3 is my thing because I have grandchildren in K through 3. That's why I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Absolutely. And I would encourage you, go to those K through 3 meetings, go to the meetings, figure out, ask these questions. Ask the people who are in charge of teaching your kids if they are, hey, are you hypersexualizing my grandchildren?
Absolutely.
Go ask them. I really do encourage that.
Obviously, I will.
Yeah.
Was it?
Hey everybody, Mr. Andrade has some input. Thank you.
All right, so as the majority whip of education in the Florida House, it was responsible to pass every education legislative policy that we've passed in the past 2 years, including the budget and the $800 million for teacher raises. One, the name of the bill is the Parental Rights in Education Act, not the Parental Rights in Legislation Act. Two, there are absolutely examples of CRT in Florida schools. And we passed the legislation to say yes. Teachers are not allowed to say that children are different morally based on their skin color. House Bill 7, the Stop Woke Act, which is the one that laid all this stuff out, was literally a clarification of the Florida Civil Rights Act. Because we don't want kids being told that they are morally inferior or superior based on their skin color. We don't want kids to be told that they bear some guilt for something that happened 100 years prior. And yes, there are some very reasonable examples of teachers telling children at kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, things that their parents absolutely would have a fit if they heard. And it is condescending to say that the first line for any topic like this that is that sensitive should not be the parent. And it's condescending and insulting to parents to say that some parents are too ignorant to be trusted with that information about their child by a stranger. So yes, absolutely, I am proud of the Parental Rights in Education Act because we said absolutely in the state of Florida, we trust parents. Parents are the ones responsible for raising their children. Parents are due the respect to be involved in those conversations. And we are not going to be condescending enough to not trust you with that information because you are that child's parent. I'm emotional about this because this is so frustrating and insulting to parents. It's ridiculous that anyone would be that condescending to act like, oh, we don't have any CRT. Yes, absolutely. They are teachers telling white children and black children and Hispanic children that they are different morally, ethically, mentally because of their skin color.
Are you
Who on
addressing
earth?
me at all of anything?
I'm looking out. I'm looking out.
Because we were at the same forum when Linda
Can I
Sanborn
just
said
finish?
there wasn't critical race theory in Santa Rosa schools, right?
I'm
Weren't
not-
we at the same forum? And she said there was a reporting process?
So I know I'm a Yahoo, but I didn't interrupt you.
You're up here, you had 90 minutes, Alex.
Again, I apologize.
I
guess I'm just a-
upset people over CRT when I don't understand. How is this upsetting? I went to school in Escambia. I was not taught critical race
Because there are
theory.
67 counties in the state of Florida.
But I'm talking about the two that I would be representing.
You're running for a state position.
I understand that, but I'm saying that here to these constituents, if there is that in the schools, there is a method. You can report it, and I
I
can
know
correct
because I
you
passed
to.
the law. But it's insulting to this community to act as if it doesn't exist at all. We passed the law because there was evidence. And yes, again, you're running for a state position. There are 67
Are
counties
there
in the
any
state of Florida.
schools here in
Stop
Escambia or
insulting the
Santa
people
Rosa?
in this room.
I'm not insulting anyone.
You are absolutely
I mean,
insulting this community, and you are being condescending to the people in this room, playing dumb, and trying to
Hey,
tell
Kate,
them
can
that
you get
something
this
doesn't
on
exist.
camera, please? Thank you.
We have two items right now before the board that are addressing CRT where it is in our schools. And it was the board, it was brought up at a workshop at the school board, which tonight they're having a school board meeting and I don't know what's getting discussed, but I believe this is on topic. But there was both a video that was shown to teachers, which was heavily CRT, and there was a questionnaire with a word problem that was heavily CRT that was given to the students. So yes, we do have a CRT problem here in Escambia, and it's the parents that have found out from their children that it exists, which is now why it's being brought up to the board. Paul Fetzko, when he first heard about it, said they were blindsided, and the district superintendent said he was not, I believe that he should have been aware of what was being presented in both cases.
That school board meeting probably is public, right? I'll definitely look at that, just to get the facts of what's going on tonight. Absolutely.
Y'all, I just want to say, I'm sorry for getting heated, but it offends me when people are condescending.
I don't like when a grown man is yelling at me when this had nothing to do with anything that insulted someone. If a voter feels insulted, I encourage you to come and tell me right now. But I answered the question when she slung genitalia of children around. I'm not doing that. I'm not checking kids like that. I am not going to sit here and say that I know personally that critical race theory exists when I went to school, kindergarten through 12th grade in Escambia County, and I was not taught it. If it happens, report it. If there's an example, email me about it. But I'm not going to be disrespected by my current state representative by being yelled at.
But you'll disrespect the rest of this room in the process.
But see, here we go again. You're disrespecting me, and I am your constituent.
Carollyn, I don't care if you're 6'7", grown man with tattoos, just got out of prison. I will talk to you the same way.
I know
You're
you don't care
disrespecting the people
about-
of this community.
Oh, again, if I disrespected you, please let me know.
I did.
No, I'm talking about them. This defense of them is actually unprofessional. And I shouldn't have come here if I was going to just be bombarded like this. I mean, I came because you asked me to come. You told me when I sat down, he had 90 minutes already. I mean, wow.
I was a little bit startled when you said you didn't recognize the CRT. I'm not going to say I'm offended.
I need examples and I need proof. I'm not going to sit here and talk about things that I don't know about. When I sat in the same forum as Alex Andrade and 2 school board members said that it wasn't being taught in Santa Rosa County, and if it was, report it.
It's been reported.
Good. Let the process play out in the court of law and the court of public opinion, but I'm not going to say things that I do not know about. That's how fake news happens, and I'm not doing it. And if I'm not elected because of that, then you deserve Alex Andrade.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Absolutely.
Raised before you got here was a issue wherein we're going to lose 70 beds out of 170 that are used for the Baker Act in receiving centers, wherein the police, when they pick someone up, or the EMTs, when they pick someone up to be Baker Acted, it has to go to a particular place. But we're losing some of that because there are policy issues wherein the law says you have to go to one of these receiving places, and because that's just the law, you have to go there, but nobody's paying for them. How would you address that?
Are you talking about beds like from Lakeview?
Yes,
Is
Lakeview and the Baptist Hospital and the various hospitals.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of issues right now when it comes to mental health services and services like that in general. I know that Walter Arrington, who is a Warrington resident, I actually mentored him. He works for Community Health Care of Northwest Florida. As far as homelessness issues, I've said that as a state legislator, I would definitely pass a pilot program, or let's look at a pilot program, $15 million or so, to look at how we can advocate for women, veterans, and children. I know they're the most vulnerable. So anytime we're losing something, obviously I'm not happy to hear that. Obviously, mental health is a big thing in our community. We have a lot of untreated people in our community, and we need to make sure that those beds are available to everyone.
It's gotten so quiet here. It looks like we have a question in the back. Miss Shirley.
I'm scared of her.
To clarify, we have to have an intake place to drop off someone who is Baker Acted or Marchman, and I don't think Lakeview has been such a facility in at least 3 years.
They don't have that? Is that what you're saying? Lakeview hasn't been?
Yeah, they do
They
not
don't
have it.
accept.
This is the only one that has it currently.
Oh, wow.
So your current beds, you might need to do a little updating before you get to election day. That's an important, very important topic. Because
Absolutely.
Our police or our EMS crews, which are already short-staffed right now, would have to, once we get over 100 Baker Act people, would have to transport to Walton County, which as far as I know is generally always full, and if
Yeah.
not there, to Panama City, to Bay County.
Absolutely. I do know that, yes.
And, you not knowing that Lakeview doesn't do that anymore, that concerns me very much. Because that's important, because that affects our.
Oh, I was asking for clarification, because he was kind of soft-spoken. I mean, he said it goes to a certain facility. I'm assuming now he's meaning Baptist?
Yeah, just my
Yeah.
suggestion would be that you update your knowledge on that before election day.
Yeah, I'll give you my business card. Let's get together and update my knowledge, you know.
What is your capacity in healthcare? You're a PA or a nurse practitioner or what?
I don't have, I mean, I work in the cannabis industry, but I'm not a doctor or anything, no.
Okay. It sounded like when you were talking about that you actually had the authority to deal with the marijuana cards and do those discussions. That's why I was.
Oh, yeah, for that, I'm with the Department of Health. I'm licensed for that to do cannabis. So when I talk to patients and stuff, to dispense it, to deliver it, to talk to patients about it when they come in. If they don't have enough medication, I have to tell them no. So what I was saying with that is that there's limits on that. Like before it was 2.5 ounces you could get every 35 days. Now it's, they're limiting it in increments. Like if you get like a 2-pack of pre-rolls, you won't get that back for 35 days. So people are running out of flour now because they don't have it in, like it doesn't just renew. And that's causing a lot of problems with patients' medicines. Do what?
During the distribution end of the medical marijuana.
Yes, not in the,
Primary care provider.
oh, no.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Are you for legalizing marijuana outside of medical use?
I mean, yes. I think that, DUIs are killing way more people than marijuana is. And I think that if alcohol is recreational, then I don't think that medical marijuana is going to cause. Now, I believe there's rules. I think you should treat it like a DWI. If you're, toking down the road right now and you cause an accident, I mean, and there's a way to test that. I think in Colorado they do consider that. You can't just be, there's rules.
Disaster in Colorado. And
Yeah.
most of the Democrats that support it don't support it now. Are you in favor of leaving other drugs outside of marijuana?
No, I think, I'm honestly not in favor of the narcotics that a lot of our patients get strung on because medical marijuana isn't accessible. So like when it comes to those harder drugs that I know, even legal prescription drugs, I think there's some dangers to that, absolutely. But other drugs, like, I don't know if you're talking about crack or meth, absolutely not. I don't even consider medical marijuana in the same category as that, to be honest.
Are there any more questions?
I don't know. What part of the area do you live in?
Inverness, Cordova, Bluffs, and Farms in Pensacola. It's in the city. Mm-hmm.
Just one versus one of the other counties? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did anyone think of any questions that we could ask to both candidates? Will, you look like I see you nodding your head back there.
Ask Alex. After the term, what are you going to do after that? Stay with lawyership or what? Congress, where are you going?
I can tell you definitively not Congress. It's an 8-year term limit job. I've never given up my law practice. I was full day today at the law firm, same as yesterday. It's nice having a full-time job and like a foot in the real world at all times. So the plan currently is to serve 8 years and, be done. Go back home, make more money, spend more time with my wife and, first child and my dogs. And that was the whole point when I mentioned to you guys earlier about the situation when I decided to run for office. We hadn't had anybody to serve longer than 1 term in a long time, let alone 4. The whole idea was to try and treat this job with the respect it deserved and treat constituents with the respect they deserve and not be condescending to them.
Would you two guys do me a favor? Would you guys have a conversation for about 2 minutes with each other on your differences and have a civil discussion?
Sure.
Put your best arguments forward on what you think to be true and why you're the better candidate, why he's not or she's not, right? Can you guys do that for me for 10 minutes?
Sure.
Sure. I just,
Because,
I mentioned a difference, and obviously it turned into.
Okay, I have to be honest. I'm looking for a functional politician someone who's not dysfunctional, someone who can have conversations without becoming polemic, right? And I'd like to see you two guys engage, that is in civil discourse, to see if you can deal with substantive issues back and forth, right, without there being a lot of craze. Would you do that for me?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I can start.
okay.
So, do you want to start? I mean,
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, as somebody that passed those laws, it was, and somebody who supports both of the Carol Boston, I endorsed her, and Linda Sanborn. While there's no necessarily definitive example of CRT in Santa Rosa County, we're in Escambia County, and it frustrated me to hear a candidate talk to constituents like that, acting as if there's no example at all and citing to a different county. As somebody who, not independently wealthy, didn't grow up here, cares about this community, it frustrated me hearing somebody saying they wanted people's votes for this job, talking to folks who are voters and constituents as if they were ignorant and uninformed.
I'm sorry that hurt your feelings, Alex. That definitely wasn't my intent. I think for me, it hurts my feelings. Or not even hurts my feelings. I mean, it upsets me because I wouldn't be running against you, and this is where I think gaslighting occurs, if you weren't cutting my rights as a woman, if you weren't cutting, as far as education, CRT, let's address it, but let's not make it a centerpiece to where it is. I've talked to teachers. Your mom's a teacher. I'm sure that your mom knows if there's critical race theory wherever she's at. And I know that you're smarter than that to go to the schools and talk to them. So I'm not going to back down on the fact that I don't know that there's critical race theory in these two counties, but I do recognize, and thank you for bringing up that point, that it is a statewide issue. And obviously, if those counties are reporting it the way that they need to, then I absolutely will address that the way it needs to be addressed. But when my power bill went up to $500, when Governor DeSantis, who I don't plan on voting for, vetoed your bill, I mean, I wouldn't be running if a bunch of constituents felt like that you were condescending to them. So when you ran and I was with Dr. Z, you were like, oh, I'm going to be the middle of the road. No, you went pretty far right. You got a lot of Democrats' votes. You went uncontested in 2018. So, you're not the person that
Carollyn, I had an opponent in 2018. His name was Greg Merck.
Oh, at the end, yes, at the very end.
No, I had an election. I didn't go uncontested, and I never said I was going to compromise my values. We're going to disagree about whether or not anyone has the right to kill another human being. That's my position on the right to life. That's my position on where life begins. Life begins, my belief is that life begins at conception. And anything after conception, we're having a debate based on when it is okay to kill another human being. I know we're not going to agree on that. I know that we disagree on where life begins.
I just disagree on being forced over pregnancy if I'm raped or a family member. Rape. That's what you wanted to pass is as abortion ban, even on victims of rape and incest. When I'm very proud that the Florida Constitution hasn't embedded the right to privacy, and they struck it down because it was that unconstitutional. So again, I'm not going to Tallahassee to change the world, but I'm not going away to take away your rights when it comes to affordable energy and women's rights and healthcare. And that's what you've done as my representative.
So I would have to disagree. I've never taken away anyone's rights, to affordable energy. I've never passed a law or tried to pass a law to say you couldn't put solar panels on your roof. All I proposed was saying the solar panel companies, which many of them are predatory, and I hope your parents aren't victims of the company that helped them put solar panels on their homes. Solar panel companies put more money into the messaging in this than any power company in the state of Florida the past year. All I did was try and eliminate a subsidy, because that's what conservative voters always told me they want me to do. We're going to disagree on that. I'm happy to walk you through the process on that one, but on the right to life, I will never waver, and I have never said I would waver, And I've always said I'd be respectful. That's what I said in 2018. That's what I said in 2020. That's what I say today. Everybody in this room has my cell phone number or has access to my cell phone number. And anybody in this room who calls me for help will get it. What I will not do is compromise my values. And yes, when I say I believe life begins at conception, I believe life begins at conception. And we're going to disagree on that, but I'm not going to vilify you for it. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth for it. We're just going to disagree on it. I can have the debate with empathy because I believe that I'm armed with the better facts and the better argument. But we're not going to agree on it. All I hope is that we can be respectful when we disagree and we stop putting words in other people's mouths.
I don't know that you respect me, though, if you want legislation that it forces me to have a child if I have a traumatic, if I'm raped or a family member does. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, and we will disagree on that. But that's what I'm saying as a voter and as a constituent and as a woman, those are my concerns. And that's where you don't have ovaries, maybe we don't,
No, that's where we differ. I don't believe that our disagreement means that we are disrespectful. You apparently believe that our disagreement means I'm disrespecting you. And we're never going to agree on that point because I am perfectly comfortable disagreeing with somebody and still seeing the value in that other human being.
It's not so much just, you're our legislator, though. That's what, let's not call it disrespect. You're voting against my bodily autonomy when you won't vote for heartbeat bills for fathers to be immediately responsible for when there's a heartbeat detected for child support. You want to take away alimony to single mothers and wives. I mean, do you like women at all? Because of the legislation, I don't know. So I don't know how much disrespectful you can get by passing laws. I mean, I don't know.
Do I get to make a joke without failing your test?
Can I say something?
Sure.
In order to have, let's say, a functional conversation, one has to empathize, right? In other words, if I had my pair of glasses, if I can look through your glasses and walk in your shoes, maybe we can have a conversation that becomes meaningful. And the same thing with you, Alex, right? And so I want to be able to have conversations with all of the people here to where I can make sense of how they view the world. In other words, if I come here as a politician and say, hey, this is my view, I don't care about your views, that's technically not a politician, because a politician should be the steward of the ideas of the people, not your ideas exclusively, not your ideas exclusively. And so why can't we have meaningful dialogue without all the jabs? And that's what I'm asking for. Can we build meaningful community between Democrats and Republicans? And right here, we can start this tonight because we have lots and lots of friction that is in the political spectrum. I mean, it's toxic. And I'm asking you two guys to step up and, yes, have a conversation that is behaviorally sound. Does that make sense to you? And
it makes sense. I just think that, when Floridians are hurting so much with kitchen table issues, affordability and things like that. I am a registered Democrat, but I used to be a Republican. Mr. Andrade, from what I've seen, he's towing a party line. So I do agree. I hope we can get there one day. But when, there's a two-party politics system and one person's absolutely funded by their party and FPL and other places, I mean, I don't know
yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about women's rights, and it's like, I've spoken to women that are upset about this right now, who are having daughters and grandchildren in the world, and he acts like that it's something, like how, but I'm not being insulted that my bodily autonomy is on the line? How would you feel if he legislated you a mandatory vasectomy? That is maddening. A right to privacy?
Okay, but let's look at it like this. When you look at the audience here, they're sitting here listening to two people talk, and what they're wanting is a conversation where people are discussing apples and apples, not apples and oranges. What I hear happening is lots of equivocation. And so you guys are using same terms, but same terms differently, and that's not getting on the same page. And I'm simply asking you guys to, show some intellectual charity Does that make sense?
I'm a little offended that you don't think I have been.
I'm not suggesting that you haven't. I'm simply trying to massage this in a positive direction. Do you see where I'm going? I'm simply saying that we, the voters, we're looking for good people that will be the steward, namely of the ideas of the people, not someone who will come up here and throw insults or jabs. We're looking for people who want to work with all of us, each and every one of us. And because if you get elected, you're not just a representative, namely of the Republican Party, you're the representative
Absolutely.
of
Both.
all. Right.
Country before
You've
party.
got to learn how to get along. And so we have a concept that we should turn to each other instead of against each other. And so my question is, can you guys turn to each other, get along, and have meaningful dialogue for the next 2 or 3 minutes? I think you guys can do it. Go for it.
I think,
So what I would say first on the one point, I've been elected twice now to this office. Both times they were contested. I had opponents. I put what I believe in on the flyers that went to every single home. On those flyers had things like free market conservatism, separation of powers, limited government, 100% pro-life. If the voters in my community did not want somebody who was 100% pro-life, then they would elect somebody else who didn't put those values on their mailers. My statement of my values when I go out for an election is my covenant with the voters who put me in office. It is no longer about what I believe, because what I believe matters far less than what the voters of this community believe. If the voters in this community vote for the values that I commit to upholding when I'm in office, it's not about what I believe. It's about what the community told me to do and understood I was committing to them that I would do. You can, I guess, insult my character or anything, but like, it's a humble approach when you say, I'm committing to the voters to stand for this, and then stand for it.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
absolutely.
It's been wonderful.
Yes.
Tell you what.
Can I get a picture of you two together real quick?
Alex, I just want to get a picture of you two together in a cordial. Just- Wait a minute, here we go. Okay, I'm gonna do one more. Thanks. I appreciate it.
done?
I have another right here.
Hey, Chris, I made the flood defenders joke. Can you fact check me?
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So a big round of applause, everybody, for people who. I'm always excited to see people serving their community in a way that I don't, outside of an orange jumpsuit. I think it looks like they're both going to stick around for just a little bit. If you want to chit-chat with the two candidates, jump up and chit-chat. It's a good time for it. If there's no additional business, I'm going to move to close the meeting. Meeting adjourned.